All right, all right. So next up, we have Adrienne Barnes, the founder of Best Buyer Persona, also a fellow Texan. So the talk is going to
Yeah.
be how to create a buyer persona you'll actually use. Bio. Adrienne is the founder of Best Buyer Persona and a B2B SaaS content marketing consultant. Best Buyer Persona was founded in 2018 and helps SaaS companies to find their best buyers using the jobs to be done framework. When she's not identifying companies' best buyers, she's using her customer research skills to create unique and effective content marketing strategies. She has worked with amazing companies such as Catchpoint, Audience, Stripe,
Mhm.
Demio, Monday.com, Unbounce, and SmartLing. It's always a challenge, like reading in front of a crowd. So I hope I didn't butcher that too badly.
Did
But
great.
take it away, Adrienne.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, let's see if we can do presentations and all of that good jazz. Let's present. And then, okay, we need to minimize this and share my screen right here. Share. Come over here. Present. All right, and you guys let me know. Can we see that? The create your buyer personas you'll actually use. Thumbs up, a yes. Alex, can you see my screen? My
Yep.
presentation? Okay,
Yep.
cool.
You're all good.
All right, so when I created this talk and really when Omniscient came out and said, hey, could you like do this? We'd love to hear from you. Um, a lot of what marketing teams, the way we think of buyer personas currently is almost in a very stereotypical type of way. Like we get together with the team perhaps and brainstorm things that we know. Sometimes people listen to sales calls or gong calls. A very few actually talk to customers. Maybe surveys are done. But I've done a lot of research around what a buyer persona is and how marketing teams use them and how they're created. And it comes to find out that they're not actually used. They're kind of brainstormed, created. The marketing team has a really fun time putting together, their Bob the Builder, Sally the sales girl persona. She's going to be Catwoman and all of these things. And then it gets put in a drawer. And so that was really the motivation for creating Best Buyer Persona. I was a part of a team, like Alex said, I wrote for a lot of really large companies, small companies, various stages in startup and B2B SaaS. And a lot of them did not have any accurate idea of who they were marketing to or like some actual functional things that they could pass down to people doing the work and say, here's who our readers are, here's who our consumers are, here's who our buyers are. Let's like create content and marketing and campaigns for these folks. And so that's really where Best Buyer Persona came from. So let's see, let me move this. How to create buyer personas you'll actually use. So back to that, 77% of marketers create buyer personas, but they're like, check the box, right? They get together one day, they do that brainstorming session, write their really cute stuff, and then nobody ever uses it again. I did a study with Audience and it was 77%. I know Jimmy Daly has done one in his Superpath group and came up with almost the same numbers. So I was like, well, that's reassuring. If a bunch of different people are coming up with the same statistic, then we're pretty accurate. We're on point that these things are being created and never being referenced again. So they're not using them. 85% don't use when launching a product, and they don't use when they're creating a new marketing campaign. So everybody's creating them, nobody's using them. And I was like, why is that? What's the disconnect? And obviously it's the quality. So they're not actionable. So the whole point of today is like to figure out how do you create something you can actually use. The number one question I get is like, okay, so we created it, but then now how do we use it? How do I put it to good use? And I say usually it's not, you're not using it because how you've created it isn't relevant. You didn't use quality data to create your buyer persona. So now you're sitting there with this document that's like, okay, well, that's great. One of our personas wants to be Catwoman, but what do I do with that? How do I then go and create a campaign or actually speak to the pain points or these person's questions? So we're going to figure out how to do that. There's a huge disconnect, and this is an old stat from eConsultancy, and I searched for something more recent, and I couldn't find it, but I think it stands the test of time. More than 90% of marketers believe that they understand their customers. Like we know our customers, we know what they want. We see the digital data, we look on Google Analytics, we've got our SEO team, like we're doing deep digital intelligence to understand, we know these people. But then when you ask customers, like, do your favorite brands get you? Are they serving you well? 80% of customers say no, like they don't understand my pain points. They're not serving me well. So there's a huge disconnect. And so what our buyer personas need to do, there are 3 parts of a buyer persona that every persona should answer. It needs to tell you who your customers are, how they behave, and why they behave the way they do. And so you always hear this, like, you need to know your customers, know your customers. And like I said before, everyone thinks they do, but then customers are saying they don't. So what does it really mean then to know your customers? If we say that, if we say know your customers, what does that mean? It means you need to be able to answer these 3 questions: who they are, how they behave, and why they behave the way they do. And that will get you an actionable buyer persona, right? If you can really answer each of those 3 buckets of questions, now you know how to empathize and what kind of content create and what questions to answer. All of those different things really come from having a clear and actionable buyer persona. So who are your customers? That's something you need to be able to answer. And when I'm saying who are they, what you need to know about them is, like, what are their experiences? What is their buyer journey? What are some questions they have? In every buyer persona I do, especially for B2B SaaS, we look at what I call the 4 R's: their roles, their rituals, their relationships, and their responsibilities. And that can go as much in detail as job titles, right? Like, what is your role? What are the KPIs that you are measured against? Like in your job, what is deemed success? How are you measured? How do you gauge when you've done a good job? Or what kind of things are you responsible for? What does your day look like? What time do you start work? What other tools do you use in your tech stack? It answers all of those different kinds of questions, which are imperative to know if we're actually going to serve these people well, if we're actually going to create entire growth strategies and product roadmaps that will serve them in a way that meets their needs. How do they self-identify? And that one's a little challenging to figure out, but with using some really good digital intelligence tools, you can figure out, how do people self-identify? And that's not just their accurate pronouns, right? Like, that's really, do they self-identify as an entrepreneur or a freelancer or an in-house marketer? Or there are tons of different ways that people self-identify, and they usually share them quite openly on their bios on social media. Personality traits, and that one gets a little interesting. I like to use like the audience that Alex mentioned that I work with, they use the IBM Watson data. And so that gets into, like, what are their personality traits? Are they aggressive? Are they conservative? Are they more stoic? Or are they friendly, upbeat? Like, you can really, if you're using the right tools, you can have a great understanding of who your customers are using those kinds of data points. And then interests, the communities they're a part of, where do they show up online? What are the platforms they use, and how do they show up online? Are they most frequently as themselves? Are they trying to do self-promotion? Or do they have avatars? Are they in Slack groups, or is it all Facebook groups? Like, it really does depend. Who are your customers? And I use a lot of third-party digital data. Audience and Spark Toro are some of my favorite tools, and I think we'll get into that a little bit more. And then the third question, how do they behave? So once again, the media they consume, and who are the people that influence them? What are the moves they make? This also goes into looking at, like, your heat maps on your website and understanding their journey, understanding how they interact with you. Do they share content, or do they just simply read it? Are they likely to retweet and comment as a part of their engagement? Or are they more a type of like engager where they're just going to open it and read it and then never really share with anybody else? There's various groups really do have different ways that they engage and behave with content. And I think, especially since most of us are doing some type of content marketing in the buyer personas, we really want to be able to understand those types of behaviors. That lets us create accurate KPIs for our content. If we know that our audience is most likely only to be the type that's going to open a piece of content from Twitter and not necessarily comment on it or retweet it or share it, like they're very private in the way that they view content, then we know that open rates should be something we want to look at, and not necessarily retweets or likes. Like if we based our KPI on retweets and likes, we would look like we failed all the time. So it's really important to understand how they behave. So then you can go across and understand, is your content doing what it should do? Is your campaign actually performing the way it should? And are we meeting our people the way we need to? So then why do they behave the way they do? The why is one of the best piece of information you can have, but also the most challenging to understand. Understanding the why behind your customers' actions provides confidence in your data accuracy, right? Like if you really do, you're going to be able to find all of this other stuff through third party, through different tools, through your own digital intelligence, but you're never going to understand why they behave the way they do if you don't talk to them and if you don't just ask them. Surveys don't really get to the why. It really is through customer conversations. And this is the part that allows you to use their own words and copy to understand truly what those like emotional and social drivers are. It allows you to serve them with empathy and then really create community for your consumers. So why is a huge piece that I think a lot of people miss when they create their buyer personas. They're not understanding the why behind their actions. Okay, so we've covered like what you need to ask, basically the large idea of what a buyer persona should be and questions a buyer persona should answer. So now step by step, how do we get there? So first, interview customers. The way interviewing customers gets you to, like I said, that insight, that social emotional type stuff, it really is a valuable asset for anyone creating a buyer persona. If you are trying to understand your customers and all you're using is third-party data or your own digital intelligence, your first-party data, you're really missing out on getting to the core of those social and emotional triggers. Like, what was it that actually convinced you to buy? What are the real problems and pain points you're that they're trying to solve? And then really getting to, I'm sure you've probably heard it like that 5 why concept, right? Like if you can ask somebody why 5 times, you get to the core of their motivation. And that's basically what this is. Now, I'm not going to say, I would never suggest that you ask a customer why 5 times. That would get annoying. But through an interview, you can hear a frustration or a delight, and then really lean into that and try to uncover deeper insights and deeper motivations that you would not be able to do on a survey. Once you get a survey answer, that's it. You've got the answer. There's no further clarification. There's no way to understand a little bit more. There's no nuance. And that the only way to get that nuance is through the interviews. So some interview tips, like the best things you can do. And a lot of this really does apply to founders. If you are a freelancer trying to come in and interview for a company and for a client, you're not as emotionally attached, right? Like there's still really good tips, but one of the ones is like, you need to validate their experience. That's really struggling for founders. So let's go through the 5. Number 1, listen. And I know that sounds like obvious, like, duh, we're on an interview. Of course, I'm going to listen to them. But the type of listening you have to do to get value out of an interview is really different than the kind of listening and conversations you have just every single day. You need to be prepared for awkward silences. You need to be prepared to ask a question and then just kind of sit and let the interviewee respond and think. And sometimes interviewees start responding and they talk through their answer and then they finally get to their core answer. Other type of interviews will really just need silence to formulate a thought. And that's a really big part of creating a valuable interview, is just being able to sit and listen to what someone has to say. Second tip, record. If it's just sitting in your brain on your computer or on your notepad, it's basically useless to everybody else. And honestly, if you think you are gathering the insights while you're in the depths of an interview, you're not likely to. You're going to miss a whole lot of key stuff. You're going to miss some of the things that they said that you were probably sitting there thinking about something else, right? Like, oh, they mentioned this thing earlier. I really need to make sure I follow up on that. Then they say another thing, and your brain is still thinking about the thing 2 comments ago. So recording allows you to go back and hear all of those little bitty comments that were made, all of the opportunities and all of the things where it's like, oh, I see, this was really good. And it allows you to share with others. And that's really the point, is you're gathering data and you're sharing it with others. 3, transcribe. There are so many tools. I've used Fireflies.ai, AI. I've used Otter. I've used the Zoom. There's tons of different tools. Really, it doesn't matter which one you use. There's Grain, whatever you enjoy, whatever fits your budget, but you should most definitely have them transcribed. Because if you're able to get it into the written word, that's what allows you to then turn around and organize the data and turn it into actual insights. And then number 4 is make sure you're asking why. Remember, we said that why was like one of the most, it added a lot of the nuance and the layers to understanding their behavior. And so anytime you get an answer that seems like it's maybe emotionally charged, or that maybe there was a lack of understanding, or if you are kind of the founder or the person who's really connected to the tool or the software, and they say something like, well, I was doing this and it just didn't work, and you find yourself wanting to defend the thing, that's when you should ask why. Never defend or explain on an interview, because the moment you've done that, you've lost the interviewee, right? Like now you're providing information. You're no longer listening, you're providing. So asking why and then validating their experience, number 5. Like if they're frustrated about something, let them know that sounds really frustrating. And all of what that does is it allows you to create empathy and a relationship with the interviewee. It opens up trust, and they're more likely to be real and honest with you if they at some level can trust that you are listening and you care about their experience. So that's a good way to interview. The second thing that I do and that we do at Best Buyer Persona is use surveys. We survey our audience. I use surveys to validate interviews in a best case scenario. I even tweeted this yesterday. I'm breaking some of my own rules with surveys. I find that surveys are a tool that are very flexible, right? Like, so you can use them to identify who maybe should get on a call. But most likely I like to use them in the other way. Like the survey validates what I've already learned on the interview. So I'll do a few interviews, create my survey questions, and then I'll be able to ask a lot of people similar questions and see where the patterns are in the responses. Keep your survey as short as possible. Unless you are outright paying people to participate in the survey, which I've actually seen done, you want to be very respectful of people's time and be very transparent in your ask. Like, we are asking you 15 questions. It should take you this long. We'd love to have your thoughts. And then obviously you can invite through email, social media, or even in a blog post if it's relevant. The thing is, you need to, like, I've even had it on banners and homepages. So the way you ask people to participate in the survey is really dependent upon, number 1, how many responses you think you need, and how specific you're trying to like what data you're trying to get to. So if you're using, maybe you're trying to really understand like clearly only buyers, only like brand new buyers, well, then I wouldn't say putting it on a website or in social would be very good, because you'd end up getting a lot of survey responses from a large variety of your audience. In that case, I would most definitely say send an email. So really think about, who are we trying to hear from, and then how should you get in front of those people most easily would be the best approach for surveys. And then your transcribe and coding your interviews. And coding interviews is basically like your social scientist, researcher, nerd way of saying going through it and organizing the data, reading through your transcript and finding the patterns. The way that I do it is I will start with the questions at the beginning. What do I need to know? What are the absolute most important pieces of information we're looking for? And for me, I use a Google Doc and I create titles. And those titles are the things we need to know. So we need to know the tech stack. I need to know job titles. We need to know pain points, frustrations, delights, the job to be done, obviously. And then anytime, once the interviews are all done and they've all been transcribed, I'll sit in and I'll have on 2 of my screens are up, and there'll be the interview on one side and the Google Doc on the other side. And I basically just read through the interview. And when I see something that pertains to one of the buckets I need to have answered, it's a copy and paste. And then once all of that information is in the right bucket, you begin to see the patterns that are available, the patterns that you see: repeated answers, repeated words, common frustrations and pain points and delights. and buyer journey steps. And so that really is where the entire buyer persona starts to come together. I also like to do word clouds. They are just kind of fun for me. I'm a very visual person, so it helps me to see, oh, okay, these are things that people talked about most frequently and most often, and then the words they use to express whatever it is, like their concerns or their frustrations, all of that stuff. The third thing we do interviews, surveys, and then digital analysis. And this is those third-party tools. So I use Audience, I use SparkToro, I use SEMrush, I will use all kinds of different things. Basically, what I'm trying to find out is who are they? What platforms do they use? What are their like how they identify? What are the keywords they use in their bio? What content do they engage with? All of that kind of information. I also use Brand 24 for my social listening. That all really applies to understanding their behavior and like where they show up online. So using those three tools kind of all in conjunction for me does a really good job for my purposes, and for actually understanding more about the buyer themselves. So I'll have more of the words, common words they use, common websites that they go to. What is trending right now? What are the conversations they're having today? My social listening will tell me very clearly, like, these are the popular topics that they're talking about. These are the words they're using. So I can not only just get an idea in general, but I can really then dig in very specifically. I can look at one person's tweet and the thread in that tweet and really understand, like, oh, this is what the sentiment analysis is, or this is kind of where this entire audience is leaning or going. And then we can address that from the point of view of the client, right? From the point of view of the team. What is it that we need to get across? What do we need to say? How can we participate in that conversation? So for the buyer persona, this digital intelligence analysis really does get me to understand who they are, right? Like we've learned why they do the things they do and how they behave. And this tells me who they are. So that is pretty much how you should go step by step to create a buyer persona that I think you could actually put to use, and not just for marketers, but also for product and for C-suite. These can be very adaptable and very flexible. So that way, it's something that is specific to your goals or the client's goals, whoever it is you're working for. I'm happy to take questions. Adrienne at bestbuyerpersona.com. That's me.
All right, Adrienne, that was awesome.
We went very fast.
No, but jam-packed and useful as always. I have a couple questions.
Yeah.
So your framework, it's filled with useful information and real data, and you can actually use these personas. It's been a minute since I've seen a persona in-house. So now when you go work with a client, like what's the typical, like when you come in, what's the persona look like? And like, how do they get the information? Is it just completely made up, or like, what do you see?
Well, right now, the clients that I'm getting most frequently don't have any at all. Like they're just like, we've never really done it because we've never used them before. They're very experienced marketers. I'm not working with like brand new baby startups. These folks like have been around, they know what's up, and they just never believed in buyer personas anyway. So maybe they've had other types of little data pockets, but they've never combined it all and really created something that was actionable across the organization. So when I come in, a lot of these, the B2B SaaS especially, they're like, look, we've just kind of used our own data. We've never compiled it in a way that everyone can use. We've never talked to our customers. And I'm talking to companies who are 5 and 10, 15 years old. I'm not talking to like baby startups. I just find it interesting, and probably because third-party data has been so lucrative, so easy to get, you could have a really clear idea of who your buyer, like who they are, without talking to them. But now that third-party data is getting more challenging, it's more difficult to reach people. Some of it's actually completely going away. The internet's talking about Google Analytics going away in like 2023. I just barely saw something.
Moving to GA4.
Yeah.
Seems like a great idea.
Yeah. So it's like, it's getting more challenging to get to know who your customers are without talking to them and without really doing specific research like this. So I think that's why people are starting to say, okay, let's get Adrienne on a call and let's get this kind of a project going so we can have a good idea of who we're talking to.
Totally. Do you think it's everyone's job to talk to and learn about customers, or is this something that you think a specialized person or a team should do and then share with the rest of the team?
So in an ideal world, in the world where everyone has just ample amounts of time and money, and like, our everyone's calendars are just cleared to do all the things they want to do, everyone would have one call with a customer a week, right? Like everyone in your organization would talk to a customer. But I've rarely seen it to where that's the case. Everybody is already overloaded and their calendars are chock full with their current responsibilities, which is why research projects like this just kind of get pushed to the wayside, because you don't have someone whose sole job is just to get to know the customers and then to share that information. So I would say, yeah, it should be one person's responsibility to then say, okay, we've gathered it all and here's what we know. And that's kind of one of the offerings that Best Buyer Personas has, is it's a research on retainer. We kind of become your in-house research team, where we go and do like certain interviews and certain number of surveys every month. And then we just say, hey, here's your key highlights. This is what you need to know. This is how your buyers are shifting, or how, we saw this thought process a month ago and now things are a little bit different. So, I mean, ideally, yeah, everyone would be able to have this, but at the very least, it should be someone's responsibility in an organization to like know who their customers are and share it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then at the end, you mentioned that other teams can use this information, especially in my mind, product teams.
Mm-hmm.
So I've heard product teams use the word like user personas, and
Mm-hmm.
marketers use buyer personas. So how much cross collaboration are you doing with the product team, the user experience research team, design team, and how close are these two models? Is it the same thing? Is a user persona the same thing as a buyer persona, or
Yeah.
are we doing one in marketing and are we doing a different one in product?
Yes. So they are very, very similar. And oftentimes I am doing both user research, a user persona, and a buyer persona. If it's a very complex tool where there's a hierarchy, there's one person with a credit card, but then a team uses it, and we need to understand the collaboration between those two, how that happens, who's the champion, who's not, how, like all of that process, the nuances between that. Definitely that's a piece of what we're doing. And I'm working really closely. A lot of the people who hire me for these kinds of projects have visibility into both product and marketing. So they're like a VP of growth or a VP of something like that, and they can see how they should be working together. They can see the dualities, and they can see like, okay, there's a struggle here. We need to understand some information a little bit better. And those are some of the best projects. I mean, I love being able to do that, because then I can hand off and say, okay, look, now here's something, and we've learned all of this stuff, and you can go off and create a roadmap, and you can go off and create an accurate campaign, and both teams can know that you're working together for the same people, and that you're like helping them meet the same goals. So they're very intertwined for sure. But at the same time, you can't approach a user the same way you would approach a buyer, right? Like those are two completely separate use cases, different pain points, different approaches to the way they use the product. So on my side, I have to be able to add the nuance and the differentiation between those two groups, while also being able to clearly like report and show in the presentation how they work together and how they're separate, and all of those, like the separate kinds of pain points and buyer journeys or user journeys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like what you ask is important, when you ask it is important, and to whom you ask it. And the answers are going to vary even with the same questions.
Mm-hmm.
So for us, we're doing a survey for our office hours, and we're trying to figure out like what people enjoy. And we have a different set of questions for non-audience, never registered people. And then I'm going to drop one actually in the chat for everybody here. So we're treating them as separate pools of information, right? Both of which are going to help us form the best event possible. But the type of person who's never been is different than the type of person who's already a customer, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. If they're already showing up and loving you, then they'll have different like ideas about what was useful, what's not useful, why they came. And if they've never showed up, then that's going to give you a lot of like, well, why? What are they not hearing? What's not resonating? What are the questions they still have? especially if they're in your sphere and not showing up. Like what's up with that? What's going on there?
Totally. All right. Well, this was super helpful. And thank you so much for doing it.
Absolutely. Thank you guys. This was great. I love these events.